And I'll go ahead and just begin with a very brief introduction. My name is Monifa Johnson, Dr. Monifa Johnson, and I am a member of the National Sorority of Phi Delta Kappa Incorporated. We have partnered with the University of Memphis to offer you this Praxis workshop centered around 5002 reading and language arts. Now, one of the things that I would like to know from those that are on the call right now, I would love to know what your expectations are. What is it that you would like to get out of our session today? What are you expecting? You can unmute, you can put something in the chat, but I'd love to know your thoughts.
What I'm looking to get out of this is just more information about the Praxis and like ways that we could be just successful with the Praxis, especially if it's our first time,
Got it. So more information about it and some tools for success, if I were to rephrase that. Yes, can I hear from one other person? Thank you, Shelby. Okay, in the chat, I see from Kendra, better study tips, the best way to prepare for this specific test. So if there's anybody else who wants to add something, you're welcome to unmute or add something in the chat. I do think from what I've heard so far, information about the Praxis, tools for success, study tips, and just how to prepare for this specifically, I do believe that your expectations will be met. But if at any time throughout this call, you're feeling like there is something more that you're looking for, or you have a question that you really want to pose, I want you to feel comfortable doing that. You can unmute and do that. You can also do that in the chat. But we are going to move forward with talking about our agenda for today. So we opened with expectations. I will talk about objectives as well. We'll talk about our norms. I will give an overview of the test so that you know what to expect. And we will review some selected response questions. And a part of that will include some study tips and some things to keep in mind. And then we will close with a reflection. So again, I do believe that your expectations will be met on today. Let's go ahead and get into the objectives. We have 3 objectives for today. Number 1, we want to be familiar with the types of questions we're going to see on this Praxis. We want to work through some practice questions, and we want to reflect on what worked or what did not work when approaching these questions. As far as norms go, the very first one is so important, engagement. So I need you to engage and participate and be a part of this. Number 2, share the airtime. Although I love your engagement, if there are voices that we're not getting a chance to hear, those voices, I want you to find a way to just interject and to share something. Third, if you're wondering about anything, ask. It's okay to ask. You can unmute and ask. You can ask in the chat. And finally, it is okay to disagree. So don't be concerned about someone disagreeing. Just let's make sure that we're disagreeing with the idea that was presented and not the person. So disagreement is not personal. Let's consider the test at a glance. The test that we are talking about today is a part of the elementary education multiple subjects test. So that test, of course, includes reading and language arts, mathematics, social studies, and science. The purpose of the test overall is to assess whether the entry-level elementary teacher has the content knowledge necessary to teach at the elementary level. But let's talk specifically about the reading and language arts subtest. Now, for this subtest, there are 2 categories that will be tested, and you'll see that here right next to this pie chart. First is reading. You can expect about 38 questions focused on reading. That will be about 47% of this subtest. The next reading and language arts category is writing, speaking, and listening. We can expect 42 items here, and this is about 53% of the test. So overall, we will have 80 questions on this Praxis. Look towards the bottom of this slide. These are 2 things that I want to point out. many of these items, you have 80 items, many of them provide a context to apply to topics or terms. So you may see some vocabulary, you may see a term that you are not familiar with. Usually there's some type of context to give you some guidance, even if you're not familiar with that term. The other thing I want to bring up is that at least 4 of the items on this assessment will be what's considered an innovative item type. So it might be multiple selection, where you're choosing more than one answer. You might have some order matching, and you might have grids. But let's talk time. In terms of time, one of the things that you want to be careful to do is spend no more than about a minute. If you have to, you can do a little bit more than that, but definitely no more than a minute trying to respond to each of these questions. Does anybody have a question so far or something that you'd like to share at this point? All right, we will move forward. These are the main content areas of this test: foundational skills, literature and informational text, language, writing, and communication. So the main content areas. Let's talk about the why for this assessment. Essentially, candidates are supposed to know, understand, and use these concepts so that they can teach, but also help students be successful. And that goes back to the idea of the purpose of this test, making sure that elementary candidates have what they need in terms of content to be able to teach at the elementary level. So that's our big why. And at this point, we're getting into actual questions. So there's a reading section with some questions, about 5 questions, and then there's a writing section with about 5 questions. Interspersed between the reading and the writing will be an opportunity for discussion questions. So again, I want us to remember that norm about engaging. It is so important that you're taking this opportunity to share your thinking, because it may help you and it may help someone else. Before we go into these questions, do I have anybody who has something that you'd like to share or a question you might have at this time? Okay. I thought you were getting ready to say something, Macy. All right, so let's move on. Here are 2 items that you might see, examples of items you might see on the reading part of this test. Remember that the reading items, look towards the bottom of the slide, you'll have about 38 items, and this will be about 47% of the test. Now, we don't want to take any more than about a minute to answer the questions that we're seeing. So what I am going to do is I'm going to set a timer for 2 minutes. And in this 2 minutes, what I'd like you to do is answer the 2 questions on the screen and then put your responses in the chat. Answer question 2 and 4 in the chat, and let's take 2 minutes to do that. So I will set my timer, I will mute myself, and you go ahead and answer these questions. Okay, I'm seeing it. I cannot see the screen. I see that Macy. Can everybody else see the screen? Okay, I see a yes from Kendra. So I'm not sure, Macy. Okay, I see Chelsea is saying yes as well. I'm not sure, Macy. Maybe try to come out and come back in. All right, and thank you, Dontarius. Let's take our 2 minutes starting now. We have about 1 minute left. Don't forget to respond in the chat. All right, so that's our time. Thank you. I'm seeing the answers rolling in. As I'm looking, it looks like for question 2, it looks like we're either choosing A, B, or C for question 2. And then for question 4, it looks consistent. It looks like everybody chose C for question 4. So this is the time when we engage. Let's start with question number 2. Anybody, what did you choose and why did you choose that?
Hi. I was stuck between A and B, and I saw some other people put C, but with me being a second grade teacher, I was thinking about too when I go around to the kindergarten classes and see when the students are actually matching up just the pictures and some of the phrases. So I thought about maybe they're just entering into that phase, but then I said maybe it's developing. So I got stuck and I just chose one.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for that. And which one did you choose?
I chose A.
Okay. Okay. Got it. All right. One other person. I'd love to hear your thoughts. That was a good response. Anybody else?
I chose C because, like she was saying, you know, when kids are younger, of course, they can match pictures with, you know, with things, but when you can't match the pictures yet, to me, it was saying like you're expanding into, you know, into going, you know, just growing up, you're just expanding into different areas.
Okay.
And, yeah.
Okay. I have a good idea of what you were thinking as you approach that one. Let's go into what the test maker said in terms of their rationale and then see if that is helpful. Because again, a lot of us, we were all over the place with this one, some A's, some B's, some C's. So let's see. The correct answer is A. English language learners at the entering stage of language proficiency can process and produce the English needed to successfully engage in the reading activities mentioned, but they cannot yet identify main ideas or sequence pictures from the oral stories because those skills come later. And it goes into why B would not be a good choice and why C would not be a good choice. So these skills come later while the student is in the developing level. So that's when they're able to do things like main idea and sequencing. And then for C, it says once they've reached the expanding level, or even D, the bridging proficiency level, they possess even more advanced skills. So the best answer for this was entering. Was that rationale helpful?
Yes, it was. It kind of put it together when I was describing it.
Okay. Okay. And now one of the things, thank you, Shelby, for that. Shelby said that that was helpful. One of the things when I was looking into this a little bit more, I learned that for those that are in the expanding stage, that's when they're receiving moderate support. And when they're in the bridging stage, that's when they're mostly independent. So they're receiving light support there. So that may be some helpful information as well. Let's go to our next question where it was consistent. Everybody chose C. So I'd love to hear from one person. What did you choose and why? Don't be scared to be wrong. That's okay. Share your thinking, one person.
If you know a student already cannot read, you know, well, okay, not cannot read, but you know, not as fluent as they should be, you would just automatically think or know to just give them something very easy to read, just to build off of the off of the easiness, just to get better and better off of it.
Okay. Anybody want to add something to it or share something different?
I agree as well, because I just did a process of elimination. Some of these options did not make sense at all. Or like, why would you give that to a student that's not fluent? So I don't think that a student reading to them would help them at this point if they're not fluent. I think it'd just be easier if they would try to read first independently on an easier level, and maybe, pull them like to the kidney table or something like that.
Okay. So now that I know what you're thinking, let's go ahead and look at the rationale for this response as well. And if we need to dig into it, we can. So for this one, the correct answer is A. Fluency refers to reading smoothly, quickly, and with expression. A offers the non-fluent student opportunities to engage in meaningful literary experiences while gaining courage and self-esteem, and while also experiencing ownership. Now let's look at choice C. So this is at the bottom. While assigning an easy to read book may help give the student practice, it takes away from the student's autonomy and may detract from the enjoyment. I would have to say that of all of the choices that are here, if there was a one best choice that wasn't just distractor, I would say that C was the best choice. But now that we're looking at the rationale, does this make sense that it's going to be A versus C? Is that helpful how it was explained? Okay, thank you, Anna. So I've got a yes from Anna. And looks like a yes from Chelsea as well. Now, if we want to talk about it some more, we can. Otherwise, we're going to move on to our next set of questions. These two questions, now the first one is all by itself, a standalone question, number 6. The next one, there are really 2 questions, but both of them relate to this short piece of text. So I want to give you 2 minutes, maybe I'll do 2.5 minutes on this one, to read and then respond in the chat. Okay, so 2.5 minutes on this one. Okay, we're down to 1 minute. Answer in the chat. All right, so that was 2.5 minutes. Go ahead and share what you have as far as responses. Even if you didn't get to all of the questions in that time, just share what you're thinking so far. Okay, I see, all right. Thank you, Chelsea, and Dantarius, Kendra, Anna. Okay, it looks like when I'm looking at the answers, it looks like we have chosen either A or B for question number 6. For question number 14, it looks like I'm looking at A, B, or C in that area. And then for question number 15, looks like I'm looking at B, D, and C in the responses. All right, so let's start with number 6. And let's go ahead and share. If you didn't get a chance to say anything yet, this is a great time to unmute. So let us know what you were thinking when you responded to question number 6.
I answered A because after reading the passage, I did not see that the narrator was very involved in the story. So as the observer, I chose that answer.
Okay, thank you for that. Did somebody choose something different or even choose A for a different reason? Okay, let's go ahead and explore this question, question number 6. The correct answer is A. The narrator of the passage is an observer, not a participant in the action and dialogue of the passage. And this is characteristic of a third person narrative. So most of us, it looks like, again, chose either A or B. Let's look at why B would not be a good choice. B and C are incorrect because the narrator neither participates in the dialogue nor discloses his or her thoughts and feelings. So we have what we are receiving from the test makers on 6. And if there's something that you want to explore some more, we can always do that. Just be sure to say what your needs are. Now, this one may have been more difficult. Question number 14 and 15. So let's go ahead and just dig into this one. Let's start with number 14. Let me get one person to share what you chose and why for number 14. And it's okay to, don't worry about being right. Just worry about engaging so we can hear your thought process, because it will be helpful to you to clarify your thinking, and it will be helpful to those that are listening as well. So let's be bold. Let me hear somebody for number 14.
I don't want to keep talking. Is that okay?
I know, I understand. I would love to hear some fresh voices as well, but you go right ahead, Chelsea.
Okay. So I thought about, well, one, I was kind of running out of time. So okay. I read it once, but I like to read things twice. So I just went back up to the first line where I saw dust at. And I said, well, maybe once I kind of read it, maybe either loneliness or confusion. But I just went ahead and chose loneliness, C.
Okay, got it. Can I hear one other person for question 14? All right, let's look at this one. And we can always dig into it as needed. For this one, the correct answer is B. A metaphor is a type of figurative language in which one image or idea is connected with another. In literature, the word dust is often associated with death because life forms decay into soil after death. The speaker indicates that love is something that will taketh rust, and therefore is a comparison about age. So it says that it's not about ignorance or confusion, and that the speaker is not talking about loneliness either, but the speaker is talking about finding pleasure in what will remain constant. So I know there was a lengthy explanation as well, but was it helpful? Is it helpful for number 14? Why the best answer is B, death. And you don't have to say yes just to say yes. If no, just say no. Okay, so I see one yes. Thank you, Shelby. Okay, not really, Chelsea. Okay, thank you. So let's look at this question. Reading this poem, leave me, O love, which reaches but to dust, and thou, my mind, aspire to higher things. Grow rich in that which never taketh rust, whatever fades, but fading pleasure brings. So when we look at this first line, what we see is leave me, love, which reaches but to dust. So think about that a little bit, about how when you're reaching, you're aiming upwards, but it says it reaches but to dust. So love only reaches to dust. And then it says grow rich in that third line in things that never taketh rust. So what we're concerned about is things that just they're ongoing, they're everlasting. So like it says in the rationale, the speaker is interested in what remains constant. And love is one of those things, earthly love anyway, that reaches to dust. And so dust becomes compared to, or becomes a metaphor for, death. So dust represents death in this line. Now that didn't help. I want you to not, it's okay to say, I still don't get it. It's okay to say that. How are we doing with that one so far, 14? And it's okay to put something in the chat too, if you don't want to unmute. Okay, so I see, I get it better now. Okay. Now, line number 15, we're already here, so we can already see the rationale. The lines above comment on the speaker's desire to, and then our best answer is C. So the speaker mentions a desire to reject things that turn to dust and acquire dust and start to fade, because these are all types of change. So the best answer for number 15 is C. And I know our answers were varied here. We had some C's, some B's, some D's. Does this rationale for 15 make sense? You can put that in the chat, or you can unmute to share. Okay, thank you, Don Terries. Okay, so that makes sense. I appreciate that. Let's move on to a discussion question. Now, when you're looking, when you have an opportunity, and some of us may have already done this, to look at the study companion that ETS provides for this test, you will notice that there are discussion questions included. Now, you will not have discussion questions on your assessment, but being able to answer a discussion question helps to, solidify your knowledge, and it helps to really clarify that you really understand the content. So I want us to think about this discussion question. A class is reading a book that has chapter numbers, but no chapter titles. And the teacher asks the students to think of an appropriate title for each chapter. What is the main purpose in choosing this activity, and why is that useful? Now, I did put a little hint here in the image, but I'd like to hear from you. Why would a teacher choose this activity, and what would make it useful?
This activity is used to see, what the students know, if they're understanding what they're reading. And so when you put a title with something that don't see, it's giving the teacher a chance to see if they are really understanding what they're reading or what y'all are talking about.
Absolutely, absolutely. Do we have anybody who'd like to add or had a different idea?
I agree too. That gives the student, it gives the teacher a chance to see if that student is just comprehending what they're reading.
Absolutely.
all the way through.
Absolutely. So it's an opportunity, even a title can be an opportunity to summarize or to give the gist of the text. All right. And then I have a response from Kendra. Like Shelby, I feel no title names allows for the students to figure out what the chapter is about. Thank you. Absolutely. Now, another type of, it's a type of discussion question that you'll find in the study companion as well. They have some text. So really brief pieces like the one that we're seeing on the screen. And then they pose some questions. Like for this one, the questions posed are, what genre is it from? What is its overall purpose? Are there any figures of speech that help to illustrate the key points? How does the author make a comment on economic differences in her society? So you won't see anything presented like this on your assessment, but your ability to be able to think through a piece of text like this and respond to these kinds of questions will support your ability to answer those 80 selected response questions that you'll see. So I want us to have this opportunity to discuss this piece as well. Now, the first thing I want to do really is discuss some of what we're going to see or hear as we're reading this piece. So if you look at these images over here, the first thing that we have on the left-hand side of the slide is step. So what is a step? It's a grassy plain that does not have any trees. And then you have 3 images that would be examples of steps, glassy plains without trees. Now, 2 other things that will come up in this text, sapogee boots. So you're looking at what sapogee boots look like. I didn't define it here because it's actually defined in the text. So I skipped that part. But this text also mentions pimmy boots. And these are boots that are made of deer's fur and leather. So pimmy boots. This one wasn't defined in the text, so I defined it here. So what I'd like to do is use what we're now understanding about a step and sapogee boots and pimmy boots and go ahead and read this text, and then we'll discuss it next. Unless I have a volunteer, does somebody want to volunteer to read this text? Okay, so I'm going to start at the top. Read the following nonfiction selection from Esther Ruderman Hartzig's The Endless Steppe Growing Up in Siberia. What genre is it from? What is its overall purpose? Are there any figures of speech that help to illustrate the key points? How does the author make a comment on economic differences in her society? And now I'm reading the text. Let me slide this bar out of my way. Okay. The spring came, the rather thin spring of the Siberian steppe, but it is impossible to have any thoughts of the thin Siberian spring without first recalling the thick mud. What with the spring rains and the thaw, the steppe became an ocean of mud, and to walk through it was like walking through knee-deep molasses. If you were not lucky enough to own a pair of sapogee, the handsome knee-high leather boots that the well-to-do wore, if you had nothing but the same old pair of school Oxfords or even pimmy boots, along with the energy needed to pull a foot from the bottom of this mud, you also, more often than not, had to stop to hunt for the shoe left behind. Whatever you wore, the object developed a crust of mud that had to be broken off after each excursion. While I may have found some of this fun, my mother did not. Her trips to and from the bakery in the mud required more energy than she had. So now that we've read through that text and we have a better understanding of steppe and sapogee and pimmy boots, I've highlighted some of the key words in the questions that were posed. So genre is highlighted, purpose is highlighted, figures of speech, and then comment is highlighted as well. But I want you to look on the right-hand side of the screen. So there's a little image that deals with genre. There's an image that deals with purpose, and there's an image that deals with figurative language or figures of speech. So now let's go ahead and have this discussion. What genre do you think this piece is from? And let's just get started with fiction or nonfiction. What are your thoughts? All right, so I've got a nonfiction. Thank you, Shelby. Anybody else? Okay, another nonfiction. Thank you, Chelsea. So yes, nonfiction. Now, if you were to get a little bit more specific, thank you, Dontarius, and just looking at what's here, what might you say? What type of nonfiction might this be? Look at biography, autobiography, memoir. Which one of those do you think this might be? Okay, so maybe biography. Okay. Now, the author is telling about her experience, right? Because she's using the words, well, I may have found this fun. So even when we're thinking about biography and autobiography, a biography is something that someone else has written about another person's life. Auto means that they're writing it themselves. But I do appreciate those responses. And on the next slide, so not right now, but on the next slide, I will share with you the annotations that were a part of the study companion for this text. Let's think about purpose. What do you think might have been the purpose for this text? First of all, let's talk about what does it seem to focus on? Like, what does this text seem to be about? You can unmute or put it in the chat.
It just seems to be about her experience in during the springtime of Siberia, during I guess walking through the Siberian steppe, maybe.
Okay. What's one of the words that just gets repeated, or it seems like the focus is all about this one thing? So yes, it's about the endless steppe. But what seems to be the specific focus of this text? So let me go to that second sentence. But it is impossible to have any thoughts of the thin Siberian spring without first recalling the thick mud. And then we have things like ocean of mud, like walking through knee-deep molasses. And if you walk through this mud and you didn't have those sapogee boots, losing a shoe, most likely. So when we're thinking about that, what do you think the author's purpose might be? You think the author is informing, persuading, entertaining, explaining, describing? What are your thoughts? All right, so I see Shelby said describing. So specifically, what does it seem that we're describing here? What is the author describing?
She's describing her experience. Well, to me, it seems like her experience growing up, just, with the mud and if you didn't have these boots, that it was a tough spring for you because you needed those boots to get to that mud.
Absolutely. So yes, definitely describing, very centered on the mud and what that whole experience was like. Now let's consider some figures of speech. So things like a simile, making a comparison, or metaphor, making a comparison. Do we see any hyperbole, exaggerations? Is there anything that you were able to pinpoint as far as a figure of speech? And I'll just call some things out again from the text. The steppe became an ocean of mud. And I see, thank you, Shelby, thank you, Chelsea. It was like walking through knee-deep molasses. So I'm seeing hyperbole, I'm seeing simile. Are there any others that you may have noticed? All right. And then finally, the last question asks, how does the author make a comment on economic differences? Where do we see economic differences showing up in this text, this very brief text?
It was like going towards the end of the story. If you had nothing but the same old pair of school Oxfords and
Mm-hmm.
penny boots, or even penny boots.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then at the end, my mother, you might find some of this might find this fun. My mother did not. Her trips from the bakery in the mud required more energy than she had.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you can just see it here. So if you were well-to-do, you probably had those Sappergy boots. If not, you probably had Oxfords or Pemmy boots, and you probably lost a shoe and had to go back and find it. So very good. Thank you so much for sharing and participating. Now on this next slide, I'm sharing with you what the study companion had and some of the things that were called out in the study companion. So here it says the main purpose of this selection is to relate a personal memory of the distinctiveness of the Siberian mud in the spring, and we were able to see that. Ocean of Mud was described as a metaphor. It was like walking through knee-deep molasses, a simile, and we were able to see that. If you check the comments in the chat, you'll see that. An observation focusing on the differences between the experiences of the rich and the poor and how they were evident in the shoes people wore. And then finally, it says this was from the first person point of view, and the reflection seems to be a personal memory that suggests that this could be from a memoir. So thank you so much. You'll see text like this in a study companion. And again, your ability to just analyze and walk through it also supports your ability to answer those selected response questions. That concludes our reading part and the questions that we will explore there. And now we're moving into this next section, writing, speaking, and listening. Now this section will have 42 items, about 42 items, and this section is about 53% of the test. I'd like us to take about 2 minutes to answer question 9 and question 10 in the chat. Well, actually, before I set that timer, does anybody have something that they'd like to share at this time? If you have a reflection to offer, this is a great time to do that.
I remember you said that it was something, of course, that we could study from, and I meant to ask you when you said something about it, where it was.
Okay, so
I know you said it.
Yes, so one of the resources, and I do have a resource slide, so I'll share it there too.
Okay.
ETS.org. They have study companions for all of the Praxis sessions. So you just find the one that you want and you'll be able to pull the study companion. For this one, you would actually be looking for 5001, because remember, this is really a part of a bigger test with 4 different subjects. Remember that? So look for the 5001 study companion. And then when you get into it, you'll just flip to the part that's just about reading and language arts for these kinds of questions.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, good question. So anybody else before I set the 2 minutes? All right, let's take our 2 minutes to answer these and put those answers in the chat. All right, that's our 2 minutes. So if you didn't get a chance, if you will go ahead and put something in the chat. I do see Shelby's response. All right, thank you, Chelsea. Now we can go ahead and start with question number 9. Which two of the following can be classified as expository writing? So what do we choose and why for expository writing?
I just chose A and C based off of what I probably would have put if I was just taking this test real quick. Like if I had to just guess,
Yes.
that's what I would put.
Okay.
Yeah, I've forgotten what an expository writing is.
I'm glad you said that. So let's do that. Does anybody know what expository writing is before I say? Okay, so the expository writing is going to be writing that explains. So think about the EX, that might be a good clue for you, expository and explains, or it's writing that describes. So when you're thinking about the choices that we have here, would you stick with your answers? Would you change? I see your responses, Anna, thank you. So writing that explains or describes. And let's go ahead and look at the rationale for number 9. The correct answers are B, a technical speech, and D, a scientific report. So a technical speech and a research report both require that information is collected and synthesized. A short story involves narrative writing, while a personal diary and editorial commentary involve the writer's thoughts and opinions, but require no facts or information. So sometimes when we're thinking about writing, sometimes we think about things as being either literary or informational. So expository writing is going to fall more on the informational side. So is that helpful? Why it's going to be B and D? I know we had a couple of different responses for that. All right. Okay, so I see those responses there. And now let's go ahead and go back to question number 10. So they give us 2 sentences here, and then they ask us how the meaning from sentence 1 is different from sentence 2. What were we thinking about here for question number 10?
I kind of chose really quickly because we were running out of time, but okay. I did not feel like D was it, and A, B, and C, I was going back and forth, so I just chose one.
Okay, got it. All right, somebody else for number 10, maybe your thoughts as well. And we're doing really well on time, so we can always dig into whatever we need to dig into. So I have one other person for number 10.
Yeah, I'm like, I think it was Chelsea who just said that. But like she said, A, B, and C, I was going back and forth with those 2. So I just picked had to pick one because time too.
Yeah, I get it. And there is, one of the tips is there is no penalty for guessing. So you only get credit for what you get correct. So if you have to guess, certainly do guess. But let's go ahead and talk about it. Let's start by looking at it. The teacher from Nebraska displayed Native American artifacts to her class. That's number 1. Number 2, the teacher displayed Native American artifacts from Nebraska to her class. So what do we see maybe moving around between sentences? What do we see as far as placement? Where words are shifting from one area to another?
Maybe the subject, or I'm
just tell me the specific The specific words. Don't try to name it, but like which words specifically? Okay.
Nebraska and the artifacts.
So, okay. And then Macy has also added in the chat, Nebraska. So it's from Nebraska that seems to be moving. So in question 1, we have the teacher from Nebraska. Okay, so who is from Nebraska according to the teacher? I'm sorry, according to this sentence.
The teacher.
So in question number 1 or sentence number 1, the teacher is from Nebraska. Now, when we look at where from Nebraska is in sentence number 2, is it the teacher that's still from Nebraska? What's from Nebraska in sentence number 2?
The artifacts.
The artifacts. That's what's different. So when we look at this, I tell you what, let's go ahead and start with the rationale first. And if that makes sense, then we know we can move on. If not, we can dig into it again. So let's do this. The correct answer is B. The meaning of the 2 sentences differs because in sentence 1, the teacher is from Nebraska, while in sentence 2, the Native American artifacts are from Nebraska. Thus, the placement of the adjective phrase from Nebraska after 2 different nouns changes the meaning of the sentences. So choice A is incorrect because the simple predicate displayed is the same in both sentences. So it's always the teacher displayed in sentence 1, and in sentence 2, the teacher still displayed. So that part didn't change. C is incorrect because the teacher is the subject of both sentences. So in 1, we have the teacher, again, displayed, and then sentence 2, the teacher displayed. So that part didn't change. In D, both sentences end in a prepositional phrase. So we have to her class, that's a prepositional phrase, and then in sentence 2, to her class. So the only thing that really moved was the from Nebraska, and it changed the meaning when it moved. Is that helpful, that rationale? All right. Thank you, Chelsea and Anna and Macy. So we will move into our next set of questions, and I will give you 2 minutes. All right, a little less than 1 minute. Okay, that's our 2 minutes. So far, it looks like we're choosing D for 17, and that seems to be consistent. I think everybody chose D for 17. And then for 18, it looks like either D or C for 18. So let's start with 17. Why do we choose D, word choice?
It's the same type of question. They literally just change how, I can't really explain, but it's the same question. They just changed the wording, basically. That's all. Changed the
yes, yes. So the sentence essentially is the same, but yes, the words are different. So instead of sailor, it's mariner, and instead of viewed, it's surveyed, and sky becomes cloud. So yes, that was a good choice D. We can just glance at what the rationale is for that one. Sentence quality is enhanced by choosing words that provide specificity and clarity of meaning, but the sentences have the same conventions, organization, and fluency. All right, let's go to our next one, number 18. Now for this one, we're going between C and D for this one. Is that what I'm saying? Yes, C and D. So before we kind of go into hearing what you're thinking, maybe it's a good idea to just talk through each of the choices. So A says a simple sentence, so a basic sentence. And this will be an example, actually, this sentence that we have in number 17, the sailor viewed the sky to determine how the trip would go, could be an example of a simple sentence. A compound sentence is going to take two simple sentences and put them together, and now it's compound. A complex sentence is going to take a complete sentence, and sometimes we refer to that as an independent clause, and then it's going to take what would be considered an incomplete sentence and a dependent clause and put them together. That's going to make it complex. And then compound complex just brings it all together. You have more than one sentence, and within that, having at least two sentences together, there's some part of it that is independent, can stand alone by itself, and another part that's dependent, cannot stand alone. I hope that that was clear and not confusing. So far, just the overview. Are we good with the differences between the simple, the compound, the complex, and then compound complex? Are we okay with that part? Okay, okay, yes, okay, very good. So now that we've gone through that, does that change how we may have responded to this? Let's examine. Two hamsters sat in the cage side by side. That by itself is which one of these sentence types you think of the choices here? You can put it in the chat or unmute, it's up to you.
Simple.
Right, so that's simple. And then on the other side of that, separated with the semicolon, we have a furtive, timid one and a glossy, bold one watched each other warily. They watched each other. So for that one, do we think that's a simple compound complex or compound complex sentence just by itself? A furtive, timid one and a glossy, bold one watched each other warily. Okay, so I'm seeing maybe it's complex. So when we're looking at this, let's go to the rationale and then we can backtrack. So for this one, the correct answer is going to be B. It's a compound sentence. So it's two simple sentences joined together. This sentence has two independent clauses joined by a semicolon, including one independent clause with a compound subject. So there was more than one subject here, but it still was two independent sentences that were joined together. And then the last sentence says, or the next sentence says, without dependent clauses, the sentence cannot be characterized as complex or compound complex. And a simple sentence only contains one independent clause. So the subject, a furtive, timid one and a glossy, bold one, we had a compound subject, but it was still just an independent clause or a simple sentence. They were just connected.
I think that's what confused me because the affirmative timid one and the glossy one, like even though we knew what the, well, okay, I guess I see now. It's still talking about the hamster. That's why the semicolon is just, you know, breaking it into the two. So I was looking at it as if it was two sentences by itself, then we wouldn't know what the, you know, what the affirmative timid one was if it was, you know, separated from that other sentence.
Oh,
but I see
okay.
that.
Okay.
I see that.
Okay. Okay. Does somebody else have something for this one, for number 18? Something that, a question you might have, or something that's clearer to you now? Okay. So that's that set of questions. And this will be our last set of questions, 19 and 20. I want us to take 2 minutes, maybe 2.5 minutes if it seems like it might be a little bit more to read. So let's do 2.5 minutes for this one, and just be sure to put your answers in the chat. All right, we've got about 20 seconds left. I see some responses already. All right, so let's start with number 19. It looks like for the most part, mostly B, did see 1A, and then 20 looks consistent. It looks like we all chose B for number 20. So I would love, now if you're not available, that's okay, but Dontarius, I would love to hear your voice. Will you share with us for number 19 what you were thinking?
Yes, ma'am, of course. I would like to say, I know that normally with oral presentations, you normally just kind of wrap everything up towards the end. I even see it in our classes now. You know, teachers normally summarize the main points at the end.
Good response. Does somebody have something different or a different reason for choosing that same answer, B? Okay, let's look at that one. So the rationale for this one is that the correct answer is B. The conclusion of an oral presentation usually contains a clear summary of main points to reinforce the presentation's goal. So we wouldn't want to expand the thesis. That means that we're giving more details about the thesis. Normally, when you get to the conclusion, you're wrapping it up. So a summary might be one way to wrap it up. All right. And then our next question is question number 20. So here, like I said, it looks like we were consistent here with everybody choosing B. I love to hear from someone. Kendra, would you mind sharing your thoughts? Okay, is there anybody else who can share with us for number 20? What were you thinking?
For 20, everything it was asking what demonstrates active listening. And to me, if they're saying, in my opinion, you were not listening. Also on C, they're trying to ask people about it. And same thing on D, if they were trying to ask a question rather than them basically saying or understanding what that person was saying, which demonstrates active listening.
Yes, yes. So the only choice that shows listening, if you can repeat what someone said, then that's an indicator that you were listening. So good response on that. The way that it's stated from the test makers, the correct answer is B. The statement demonstrates paraphrasing of other statements. An active listener spends more time listening than talking, which paraphrasing demonstrates. And we all had that one. All right, we are actually winding down. So we do have a discussion question here. I want to talk a little bit about what you're seeing on the screen. The question on one side of the screen, I have the stages of writing development. And this again came from the study companion. So I did not make this up. So on one side from the study companion, those stages, picture writing is a stage or phase, scribble writing, random writing, invented spelling, and conventional writing. And then I want us to look on the right side of the screen where we have some examples of student writing. Now, these three examples that are in black and white, these came again from the study companion. But this picture, this actual image over here on the right-hand side, I had a Facebook friend that I asked for permission to utilize this because this is a note that her daughter wrote to her. So let's look at these and let's consider the question. There are three examples plus one that I added of student writing. Which phases would you put each one into and why? Let's start with example one. Where would you put that and why? What are you thinking? You can unmute or you can put something in the chat. Does it look like picture writing? For example one. Y'all stay with me, engage with me, stay with me.
I'm stuck. Just because I do not remember exactly what the writings are. Again, I know it's not picture writing. I'm stuck between maybe scribble because it's something that we cannot understand.
Okay.
And maybe invented spelling, which means they were just maybe, well, no, I'm gonna say invented spelling for example too. So I'm gonna stick with scribble maybe.
Okay. Can we decipher a scribble though? Like what does scribbling look like? Does it look like the formation of letters really? What are you guys thinking?
Yeah, scribble is just scribbling. Like, like when you're just starting to write and you just, like when you give a child a pencil or pen when they're younger and they just scribble because, they literally don't know how to write a letter or a number.
When I'm thinking of scribbling, to me, I'm seeing it just in my head. It doesn't have to look like this. I'm just seeing a lot of swirls. So not really intentional trying to form any letters. So for example one, when I'm looking at what I have on the left, I'm like, okay, it's not a picture. It's not a scribble. They're not really spelling. To me, if they are spelling something, I can't tell what it is. So it looks like random letters to me. Now, if you can read that, then you just go ahead and tell me what example one says. All right. What about example 2? I know I did hear what you're thinking about for example 2. Do others agree that this is invented spelling, or do you see this falling into another phase? Example 2.
Example 2 is, well, to me, it seems like invented spelling because they know how to spell some words, but of course, some words they don't know. So of course, they're just going off of what it sounds like in their head.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and then I see that Shelby put in the chat D, invented spelling as well. Okay, what about example 3? What are you thinking for that one as far as phases of writing? What do you think this student might be?
I was just gonna say what Shelby said. The student is writing down what what they hear.
Okay. It looks like, okay, I see an E, conventional spelling, okay? So the conventional spelling is going to actually look like what it's supposed to be. So if you're spelling cousin, like in example 2, it says, my cousin April came to play with me. She played baseball. So they spelled the cousin K-U-S-U-N because they were inventing how to spell it. They didn't really know, but conventional is going to be the actual following the rules of spelling and how cousin is supposed to be spelled. So example 3, when we're looking at that, okay, I see that, gotcha, thank you, Shelby. So when we're looking at that, we're trying to see, can we decipher what it says? Does it look like an actual word that we might be able to read, even though it might not be spelled correctly? And if not, then it looks to me like this might be another example of random letter. Because when I'm trying to put those sounds together, the A, the K, the T, the P, maybe an S, I'm not really sure what they might be spelling. Whereas when I look at the picture of no babies allowed in my room, I know what's being said here, even though it's not spelled correctly. So what would that picture be? Which of these phases?
Invented spelling.
Invented spelling. So it goes back to that. I see your response to that, Shelby. So yes. This is our last discussion question, ladies and gentlemen. So we're going to talk about a few other things, and then I'd love to just get some feedback for you before we close. Again, we're doing really good on time. Oh, I'm sorry. I actually do have another discussion question. And this is one we don't have to spend a whole lot of time on, but what's on the left-hand side did come from the study companion. So they have what they call study topics. And this is one of the study topics. On the right-hand side, the question is, if you had a project about the painting techniques of Vincent van Gogh for your upper elementary students, what are some resources you would recommend to the students? And I know it says, what are the top 3 kinds, but let's just call out one. What's one resource that we see on the left-hand side that we might use just to help students out with their project? So they're trying to learn about the painting techniques. What resource might we use for that or recommend?
Internet.
Okay, definitely could use internet. Might find articles that can relate to the painting technique. So yes, that can definitely be a good source. Could be a book, Kendra said. There may be a book about Vincent van Gogh and his painting techniques may be included there. So that's another good one as well. All right, so as we move on, I would love to go ahead and share with you 2 things to keep in mind. One of these I mentioned earlier. First, there's no penalty for incorrect answers, so guess. You can answer the questions, maybe answer the ones that you are comfortable with first and then backtrack. But if you have to guess, you just go ahead and do that. Just give it your best response. The other thing to keep in mind is that what I've already said, you can answer those questions in any order. Some study tips: consider spaced practice, which means that you're spreading that practice out. You're not trying to do it all at one time or in a short period of time. Also consider self-quizzing. You might make up your own test questions or you might use some flashcards, so consider that. Third, active recall. You might take one of the topics. Let's say you download that study companion from ETS, you look at some of the study topics, and you just pick a topic and write down everything you know about that topic. And then you can turn around and compare it to the study companion and what's listed. That might help you to see if there's more information that you want to make sure you're aware of before you test. Next, mix it up. So don't just focus on one topic, try to focus on several different topics. The next tip is to make things concrete. If there's some type of visual or picture or example that will help you understand the concept, then you want to know what that thing is so that it's helpful to you. But ultimately, figure out what works for you. Everything doesn't work for everybody. These tips may not necessarily work for you. So figure out what it is that's going to help you be successful on this assessment. Resources. The study companion, these questions and discussion questions come from the ets.org study companion. So look at that. You also have study resources on the University of Memphis's resource page for the Praxis. There's YouTube that you can utilize. You also have access as a student to 240tutoring.com. So you can get some extra practice there as well. Now, before we actually just end this session, this is a good time to reflect. After going through some of the reading questions, the kinds of reading questions you might see, or the kinds of writing questions you might see, or even thinking through those discussion questions, what are your takeaways? What do you want to remember, or what are your reflections?
What I learned from this was that I really need to just go back and just review and just think about literally stuff that we learned in elementary school. Like a lot of this stuff is just going back to elementary, and just going over the basic knowledge of it, because it's really basic knowledge. It just adds in a way that can confuse you.
All right. That was an excellent reflection. Excellent. Any other takeaways or reflections?
For me, I feel more encouraged because I've taken mine, I want to say maybe 4 times by itself, and then I've taken it as 5001, like everything at one time.
Okay.
And me being an ELA teacher, I'm thinking like, okay, I got this, but it just seems like I just can't get over this one. So I'm looking, when I was answering the questions, I'm like, okay, sometimes I go too fast, or sometimes I'm not reading the whole thing. So I have to take my time. I tried to space out studying. I tried, maybe studying just for that week. And I believe that it's definitely in me, because my scores are like around like 149. So I'm almost there. So I need to and just be positive and pray about it, and it's gonna work out.
Yes, yes, yes. Any other takeaways or reflections? If you had to share something that you think could have gone better, or an approach that you enjoy for the next time that I am doing a session, what would you like to share with me? What are your thoughts? So if I ask that another way, I'd say what went well and what could have gone better. What are you thinking?
I loved it. You were very thorough in your explanation for the answers. When I got stuck on that one question, you went back and explained it in a way that I could understand and break it down better. So okay. I don't suggest anything. You did everything great.
Thank you, Chelsea. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
I see something. Oh, somebody said what Chelsea said. Thank you, Shelby. I appreciate that. So I enjoyed. I appreciate you for your engagement, for taking this time out. I think that part of our reflection was absolutely perfect in terms of being positive. This is something that you can do, and it does not matter how many other attempts that you have had. You can do this. Really, I think about a little girl who said to me one time for a completely different reason. She said, all I need is skill and practice. And that's the same for you. Just some skill and some practice. You've got this. I am rooting for you, and I thank you. Now, Miss Perkins from the University of Memphis asked that I share a survey with you in the chat. So I am going to go ahead and do that now. And we're a little early. We're about 8 minutes early. So I'd love if you would take that time to go ahead and complete that survey. Otherwise, thank you for your time. I have enjoyed you, and I hope you have a great rest of your evening.